Welcome from San Diego, California. We are reaching you in English, Spanish, and Portuguese live through a unique and complex international telecommunications network via satellite, microwave, and cable. The International Training Center brings us together once again through this original video conference program, which joins distinguished organizations representing education, business, and government in Mexico, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, Panama, Colombia, Venezuela, Peru, Ecuador, Brazil, Bolivia, Paraguay, and Argentina. We also welcome Spain, the United States of America, the Organization of American States in Washington, D.C., and the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development known as UNCTAD in Geneva, Switzerland. We would also like to extend special greetings to our new receive sites of Distinguished National Training Network, CONALEP, in Mexico, and those of the prestigious Latin American network Multivisión Virtual campus. During our program today, we will examine what effects globalization and labor migration have on the market for talent and skills that are needed in today's economy. This is the first video conference of the year 2002 series entitled Excellence with a Global Flair. I'm Richard Page of the Page Firm, a law firm specializing in international business litigation, arbitration, and mediation, and your moderator for today's program. Labor migration across borders is increasing worldwide as a result of the global community's push for more open flows of capital and goods. The workplace is fast becoming irreversibly more multicultural and dynamic. Immigrants bring ambition, vigor, and ideas. One of the challenges that organizations face today is how to develop more effective job location placement and career development services to be able to compete for the talent and skills most suited to their needs. A more globalized work environment might just be the only formula for success in the future. This exciting video conference will present an overview of the growing impact of globalization in our organizations, the expected changes in the work environment, and the strategies organizations need to adopt to stay ahead in this new and complex market of talent and skills. Business, government, and education, challenged by rapid technological advances and increasingly complex markets, must now, more than ever, strive to increase their productivity and competitiveness. Developing an enriched and revitalized workforce in a drastically more flexible and multicultural environment is a goal successful organizations and communities around the world should focus on achieving. Let me introduce today's first speaker, Mr. Charles Brass. He is the chairman of the Australian-based NGO, The Future of Work Foundation. The mission of his organization is to create a better future for work. Charles's previous work experience includes that of entrepreneur, secondary school teacher, and 15 years in corporate human resources, the last 8 as director of a German-based multinational. Charles has spoken with audiences all around Australia and across the world and says he enjoys working with people who, like him, are struggling to put the profound changes which have taken place in the world of work into some perspective for themselves. Along with this work experience, Mr. Brass has many academic qualifications, beginning with an honors science degree and an MBA. Our second speaker is Mr. Richard Bowles, a well-traveled speaker and consultant on the topic of careers. This is undoubtedly due to his authorship of the most popular career planning and job hunting book in the world, What Color is Your Parachute? A practical manual for job hunters and career changers. There are more than 7 million copies of the book in print, more than 20,000 people buy it each month, and it is printed in 12 languages. What Color is Your Parachute was selected by the Library of Congress as one of 25 books that have shaped readers' lives, keeping company with the Bible and The Little Prince. Mr. Bowles is author of a number of other books, including Job Hunting on the Internet and The 3 Boxes of Life and How to Get Out of Them, an introduction to life work planning. He co-authored The Career Counselor's Handbook with Howard Figler and Where Do I Go From Here with My Life with the late John Crystal. Mr. Bowles also maintains the free Job Hunters Bible website. Mr. Bowles is an alumnus of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he studied chemical engineering. He completed a degree in physics at Harvard University, and he received a master's degree at the General Theological Episcopal Seminary in New York City. Welcome, both of you, and thanks for being with us today. I would like to begin with a question that you both may answer. As organizations become more and more globalized and recruit their employees from a wider and wider market in order to remain competitive, new recruitment and human resource management is needed. Large organizations in education, business, and government have, to a degree, been successful in establishing such resources, while smaller organizations in the same sectors might not have the capacity to do so. What new technologies could smaller organizations use in recruiting employees to remain competitive? And secondly, what are some of the tools available to employees seeking employment in smaller organizations abroad? Would you like to take the first one about small organizations?
Thank you. Yes, large organizations are often perceived as having better links in the international world, and small organisations find it difficult. I think, however, one of the great advantages small organisations have is their flexibility, and if they were to build networks and alliances with other similar organisations, with their suppliers, with their competitors, with other organisations doing similar things in other parts of the world, they can achieve the same sort of global reach that their large competitors can reach, and I think in that way achieve access to the global workforce.
Mr. Bowles, what can the employees themselves do?
Well, I believe that they have to pounce on alternative ways of going about whatever it is they're trying to do. In this case, we're talking about finding work. We often emphasize in the global migration how much employers need the help, but the other side of that coin is that employees who migrate to a country for other reasons than work do have to find work there. And so I think the small companies have to do more to train their employees, would-be employees, and so on, in the method of finding fitting work that uses their aptitudes.
Thanks for your answers. Let's begin now with Module 1, in which Mr. Brass will speak about the factors that have shaped our increasingly mobile workforce and how organizations can gain a competitive advantage by recognizing them.
I live in Australia, which is widely regarded as one of the best countries in the world in which to live. Yet, last year, more than 157,000 people left Australia without expecting to return. To put this in some context, this is more than twice the number who migrated from Australia for employment-related reasons just 20 years ago. More than 1/3 of these migrants are under 34 years of age, and they are not leaving Australia because they don't like the place. Rather, they're leaving to join the global labour force, and they're being joined by people from countries right across the globe. This trend is not just evident in so-called developed countries, it is being experienced everywhere as the best and brightest young and not so young people are being lured to work across national boundaries. To give examples from 2 countries in this region for which reliable statistics are available, in Ecuador, employment-related outflows increased by 80% between 1986 and 1996, and in Mexico, between 1992 and 1995, migration increased by 27%. And one example from another part of the world, in Japan, between 1986 and 1999, employment-related migration increased by 280%. Of course, all these people have to go somewhere, which means many countries are also seeing record inflows of migrants seeking and getting employment. To quote some further statistics which emphasise this point, Peter Stalker in Workers Without Frontiers points out that between 1970 and 1990, the number of countries classified as major exporters of labour increased from 29 to 55. The number identified as major importers of labour increased from 39 to 57, and the number which were both major importers and exporters of labour increased from 4 to 15. In Australia, for example, we lost 157,000 people to jobs overseas, but we also had nearly 265,000 people take up skilled jobs in Australia during the same period. An indication of increased awareness of the importance of this type of migration is this article from a major Australian newspaper during last year. One of our national political parties identified the nearly 1 million Australian voters who live overseas as a niche market and lobbied them personally in the lead up to last year's election. When politicians start to believe there are votes in something, you know it must be important. What we are seeing across the world is an increased economic flow of labour paralleling significant increases in international flows in trade and in capital over the past 100 years or so. International flow in trade is nothing new. It dates back to Marco Polo and before that to Vikings in long ships. International flow of capital is more recent but just as profound, with trillions of dollars circling the globe every day. Migration of labour is also, in one sense, nothing new at all, since many people believe that the entire human race is descended from a single individual who lived in Africa more than 2 million years ago, and, as population increased, slowly spread around the world. More recently, wars, natural disasters and diseases have spawned huge movements of people from one place to another. But the internationalisation of the labour force is a very modern phenomenon, and a phenomenon whose implications are barely understood. Let me take a few minutes to explore some of the issues which arise as labour becomes more mobile. The most commonly mentioned consequence of labour migration is a loss of skilled labour, or more colloquially, a brain drain. To some extent this is true, since young and highly educated feature prominently in migration statistics. The same can also be seen by examining the employment practices of multinational companies, who make a habit of moving their most capable young employees around the world. This picture, however, is nowhere near as simple as this. Firstly, multinationals only employ a small minority of the people in any country. In 1993, multinational corporations employed less than 3% of the world's workforce. Secondly, much labour migration takes place between countries with common borders, and in these instances it is predominantly unskilled workers who migrate. And thirdly, as I have already noted, much migration nowadays is reciprocal, and often more skills are gained through inwards migration than are lost through emigration. There are a variety of other complications here. Portability of educational qualifications hasn't increased at the same rate as labour mobility, and many migrants find themselves unable to use skills they gained at home because their host country does not recognise their qualifications. In my view, there is a significant opportunity here. Those countries or institutions within countries who can create robust processes for recognising prior learning as part of their educational curricula will become more attractive destinations for the wandering skilled migrant. Networks such as that of the International Training Centre, the host of this program, have a significant role to play in facilitating more effective utilisation and transfer of skills between countries. This works both ways. First, it helps in attracting skilled workers who can be confident that their qualifications will be recognised. And second, for the same reason, recognition of prior learning attracts domestic immigrants to return after a period of time away. There is another aspect to be considered here. Educational institutions are notoriously conservative, and their curricula often change too slowly to keep pace with a fast-changing world. Invariably, this results in a surplus of skills in one area and a deficit in another, something governments around the world are struggling with as they try to decide where to target their scarce education expenditure. Given that over half of all the jobs being filled today didn't even exist just 30 years ago, deciding which educational curricula to invest in can be quite a challenge. All too often, by the time educational infrastructure has geared itself up to target a particular specialist area, a shortage has turned into a glut. The excess of lawyers in many countries today is just one example. The media in many countries have enjoyed reporting stories of educational institutions training graduates in disciplines long after the specific need has disappeared. It may be possible to increase the rate of change inside educational institutions to some extent. However, I think this runs the risk of creating systems which are too narrowly focused on meeting today's immediate needs and overlooking the more timeless qualities of education, such as learning from the past. Instead, it seems to me there are at least two other ways of dealing with what I believe is the inevitable lag between current workplace priorities and educational outcomes. The first has to do with recognising that learning how to think is at least as important as learning what to think. Leading-edge educational institutions have appropriately devoted more time and effort in recent years into understanding the processes of thinking and learning than they have spent in revising the actual content of their courses and programs. There's still more to be done here. Employers and students themselves, as well as educators, need to recognise that ability to recall specific facts or data really is much less important than knowing how to get and to use the information you need. Building units on learning to learn into all educational programs will increase the number of people emerging from formal education who can deal flexibly with whatever circumstances confront them in the workplace. But there is a second step needed as well. Having a flexible approach to learning is only of limited use if the actual opportunities for new learning do not exist. This is where centres like the International Training Centre have a key role. By providing relatively easy access to leading-edge knowledge and understanding, these centres really do assist in the actual process of retraining, or as it is often called, lifelong learning. These centres help focus attention on important contemporary and emerging issues and invite the sort of analysis and discussion which initiates through learning broadcasts like this one. In broadcasts like this one, ITC introduces new themes or challenges, and then the interactions created by site coordinators provide a practical mechanism for applying these themes and challenges to individual situations. Another common solution to these skills transfer and recognition issues, promoted not surprisingly by the USA and by multinational corporations, is the internationalisation of educational curricula. Developing common international curricula, particularly in strong vocational skills, so the argument goes, would make skilled labour even more mobile. We can see this becoming a reality as more and more universities and technological institutes offer their courses over the internet. In this region, you've seen the rise of NAFTA, a clear attempt to reduce at least the economic importance of traditional nation states. In Europe, it's the European Union. In South America, Mercosur. I understand and appreciate the importance of our emerging global consciousness. But I hope we have enough sense to create it in a way which doesn't destroy the rich diversity which currently enriches our world. I'm a strong believer in what the current leader of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, calls global neighbourhoods. A second issue to consider as international labour migration increases is finance. What are the monetary implications of a more mobile workforce? Again, this is a complex issue. Immigrants clearly help raise the economic standards in their host country. But the money they send back home, known as remittances, does the same thing for the countries they've left. Peter Stalker suggests that worldwide remittances might be the international largest trade flow after oil, and estimates they totalled $65 billion in 1989. A terrific example of this is the history of American-Mexican labour flows. Until the 1960s, many American states welcomed Mexican workers to engage in seasonal labour, such as fruit picking, or as low-skilled labour on production lines. When the border was closed, the huge amounts of money which had poured south dried up. In order to make up this gap, the Mexican government had to heavily subsidise and tariff protect the development of the so-called maquiladora plants, set up on the border to produce for and trade with the USA. These issues not only have an impact at the global and national levels, there's much here for organisations, both domestic and international, to ponder. I've already mentioned vocational education. Those who can quickly and accurately recognise prior learning and articulate it into further education and work will have a competitive advantage in dealing with an increasingly mobile workforce. Those who can effectively transfer skills and knowledge from expatriates to locals will gain a similar advantage. Locals are very often cheaper to employ and more reliable in the long term than expatriates. To return to national implications briefly, countries could do well to consider requirements for skill transfer in addition to, or perhaps as the trade-off for, the generous tax benefits very often offered to expatriates. Domestic organisations, which recognise the inevitability of wanderlust among their young-minded employees and work hard to attract them back and retain them, will also gain an advantage over their rivals. Universities have done this for some time through the offering of regular sabbaticals, and some leading-edge companies have also moved in this direction. Human resources practitioners talk today of the importance of A and R, attraction and retention of key employees. And the human resources literature is filling up with well-researched answers to the question, we've spent all this money getting employees here and developing them, now how do we keep them? Since this is a particular interest of mine, I might briefly list some of the ways in which leading edge companies are dealing with particularly the retention issue. I've already mentioned educational sabbaticals and how there are now corporate versions of these. Sometimes they involve multinational companies providing international opportunities inside their businesses at the instigation of the employee. But for companies without overseas operations, it's still possible to provide placements with customers, suppliers, overseas alliance partners, or even to organise exchange arrangements with otherwise unrelated companies. Again, networks like the ITC Group can be used to set up, facilitate and monitor such arrangements. The key issue here is the extent to which companies are able to maintain contact with employees who yearn for overseas experience. If your employee has to resign to pursue their passion, your chances of regaining their services in future are very low. If, on the other hand, companies are flexible enough to actively accommodate employees seeking international experience without requiring the employee to sever their relationship, the chances of regaining the employee are improved immeasurably. This is the same challenge all companies face as they strive to make their workplaces people-friendly. How far can we go towards accommodating the individual wishes or needs of our employees without compromising our future viability as a company? The answer to this question will obviously vary from company to company. But my experience over the past 7 years proves that creating people-friendly workplaces costs much less than most managers believe and provides returns which far exceed the costs. One recent example is Cisco Systems from the USA, who recently offered staff the option of a partially company-funded extended holiday on 20% of salary in lieu of redundancy payments. Their hope was both that business would have improved by the time the holiday was over and that returning staff would be re-energised after their break. I could quote a number of other examples, but what each clearly demonstrates is a stronger belief in the fundamental importance of the contribution that people bring to business success than is unfortunately evident in most companies. As I have said in earlier broadcasts, one of the profound consequences of the changing world of work is the breaking down of old stereotypes about work and workplaces. As stereotypical full-time 9 to 5, Monday to Friday jobs disappear, these now represent less than 10% of jobs in Australia. They are being replaced by a plethora of more contingent, part-time working arrangements, which, at least on the surface, have greater potential to allow employees to better manage the relationship between their working and non-working time. In organisations increasingly striving to become family-friendly, those employers whose human resources systems can accommodate and encourage these fractured working patterns will be immeasurably better placed to retain their key employees. There is one final issue I would like to address, and that brings together the three prominent international economic commodities: labour, capital and technology. Some commentators argue that it is only rigidities in the international movement of labour which are preventing the full realisation of the global marketplace. A typical example of such arguments was published in Britain's Financial Times late last year, and I quote, "In order to convince those with an unthinking prejudice against globalisation, a dramatic gesture is needed which would demonstrate that the free movement of capital and labour is of benefit to the world's poor. All should be allowed to seek their fortune in any country of choice. Like other forms of economic liberalisation, this would increase the world's national income and particularly benefit people in poorer countries. The best results could be obtained if all developed countries adopted these policies. Countries could do this unilaterally." That's the end of the quote. Such arguments, however, ignore a fundamental difference between labour and capital. Capital may well be an economic property which can be extracted from physical resources and migrated with impunity around the world. But the economic concept of labour is inextricably bound to the people from which it's derived. It might be economically feasible, perhaps even efficient, to have plane loads or boat loads of people moving continuously around the world, competing with local labour. But it wouldn't be much of a life for those involved. It's also unnecessary. I believe there are ways to use the world's capital and technology resources to better make it possible for individuals and countries to create efficient and viable local economies. There can be little doubt that the recent increase in international labour migration has been of economic and social benefit to the world. It has also created a number of significant opportunities for individuals and countries around the world to make even greater gains. Thank you.
Let's now move to the second module of our program, in which we will explore in more detail how we as organizations and as individuals can prepare ourselves to successfully ensure successful recruitment of key skills and talents.
Thank you. I'd like to summarize what we have learned or relearned thus far in this telecast. 1, we are living in a global economy. That economy is characterized by global migration of capital and trade and products across national borders. If this migration sometimes makes governments, lawmakers, and business owners nervous, that is nothing compared to their reaction to another migration across national borders, namely that of people. These migrants are called by many names, sometimes simply people, sometimes immigrants, and sometimes workers, men and women who need or will need jobs in the new land they have chosen. 2, in one sense, this migration of people is a relatively small problem. It currently involves less than 2.5% of the world's population. 3, but in another sense, it is a big problem, or is going to be a big problem in the years ahead, inasmuch as the migration numbers are increasing dramatically year by year. And migrations are not equally distributed around the world or even within one country. Certain places are inundated with migrants while others are not. 4, the first instinct of a nation which becomes aware of this problem is to try to make it more difficult for the would-be workers to enter their country through such devices as tougher immigration laws. Fearful nations bemoan not only the potential loss of jobs to these immigrants, they bemoan as well the dilution or destruction of a cultural heritage, which they hold to be critical to diversity and the survival of the species. 5, the alternative instinct of more enlightened nations, at least, is to welcome the new workers, especially those who offer highly skilled and needed talents to their workplace, and bring cultural diversity that enriches a nation. 6, given this global economy, there is a great need for nations to revise their educational systems so that they better prepare people for living and working in other countries than their own. Schools need to more heavily emphasize teaching their students how to think and how to get and use the information they need throughout their lives. And now on with our story. Immigrants who are allowed to enter a new country still face daunting problems with respect to finding a job. They do not come to a land where everyone is employed but them. They come to a country already filled with competitors, that is, lots of other people looking for work as they are. In the U.S., for example, over 900,000 U.S. job hunters abandoned their search for a job last month, convinced that there, quote, are no jobs out there. And these are natives who have often held jobs in the U.S. for 10 or 20 years, with lots of contacts and know-how about the U.S. scene. As these give up month after month, new immigrants arrive with high hopes, but without the contacts, without the know-how, and without the years of experience in the U.S. job market. Typically, with these handicaps, they very swiftly join this pool of 900,000 discouraged job seekers who have concluded, quote, there are no jobs out there, unquote. As in the U.S., so in other countries as well. At this point, it dawns on us that the global economy requires a new kind of education. Education about the job hunt itself. What are its laws? What are its problems, and how we can overcome those problems? Migrating workers are not born knowing this. They need to be told what's wrong with traditional methods of job hunting, and, to use a gambling metaphor, how the dice are loaded against them, and how to get around all that. My friend John Naisbitt, author of the classic book Megatrends, says that some countries or places are bellwethers, places where new ideas or new trends first appear, from which other nations and places can learn down the line. In the matter of the job hunt, the U.S. is the bellwether. The nature of the job hunt has been more studied, more surveyed, more analyzed there than in any other nation on earth. And, good news, the analysis has been found to be applicable not only to the U.S., but to many nations and cultures around the world. As I said, a global economy demands that we all familiarize ourselves with this research, and demands that we allow job hunters, both immigrants and non-immigrants, access to this information as a natural part of their lifelong education. Timely at any time, but never more so than when they are actively looking for work. Global migration without more education concerning the nature of the job hunt is doomed to pile up problem upon problem, like a multiple car pileup on a major traffic artery. Typically, in the U.S. and elsewhere, this sort of information is not presented in either secondary schools or universities. It is presented by individual career counselors or coaches in offices funded privately or publicly on a day-by-day or weekly basis. This new educational model, teach me as much as you can about the nature of the job hunt, is called job hunting programs, or, more elegantly, career management systems. Career management systems taught preferably to active job hunters may include lectures, group discussion, shared experiences over many weeks, private counseling, mock interviews, and so on. They exist around the world and are constantly growing in number. These career management systems, in the thousands, have been heavily influenced in their design and program by a U.S. book. Its title in English is What Color is Your Parachute? A practical manual for job hunters and career changers. It summarizes chapter by chapter all that we know today about the job hunt. With over 7 million copies in use thus far and revised annually, it has shaped career classes or career management systems in country after country around the world. It has been translated into 12 languages, including Spanish, Portuguese, and English. Of course, in one of the ironies of publishing, the current Spanish translation is out of date, out of print, and as we owners of a car say, in the shop for repairs. It should be reissued later this year. As I am the author of that book, I have been asked today to outline briefly for you what the key career management ideas are that are so needed if migrating workers are to be successful in finding a job in their new chosen land. There are 7 key ideas. 1, there are always jobs out there, maybe not in the immediate vicinity of where you live, but somewhere in every city or town in the U.S. and elsewhere around the world. Organizations are born, organizations expand, workers become restless, quit, change jobs, move, become ill long-term, or become handicapped, retire, or die. There are always jobs somewhere out there waiting to be filled. Second, the fact that you can't find those jobs only means the vacancy hasn't been advertised, or you are not using the right method to find it. Most people who can't find a job assume there is only one way to look for the jobs that are out there: agencies, ads, and resumes. They assume that if they hunt for jobs this way and can't turn up anything, there must not be any jobs out there. This is a false assumption, as I can easily illustrate with a story from outside the job world. I had a friend once who moved to another U.S. city. We lost touch with each other. But 2 years later, I found myself in that city, and I decided to look him up. How to find him? Well, I assumed everyone in the U.S. had a telephone. So I looked him up in the phone book. No listing. I thought maybe he had an unlisted number, so I called information and asked. Nope, not even an unlisted number. Consequently, I gave up. I concluded he had moved on to yet another city. It turned out I was wrong. He was still in that city. He just didn't happen to have a telephone. My problem? I had adopted the wrong strategy for finding him. I assumed everyone would have a telephone. Wrong. In the U.S., only 94% of all households have telephones. The other 6% don't. He was among that 6%. I eventually found my friend. I contacted his former church, found friends of his there who knew exactly where he had moved to in this new city. Hunting for my old friend was easy when I used the right strategy, and from difficult to next to impossible when I used the wrong strategy. And the moral of this tale? A tight job market isn't the biggest problem you face as a job hunter. More often than not, your search strategy is the problem. Third, you must always be ready to change your strategy. There are only so many jobs you can find using any one particular job hunting strategy, such as job boards or agencies or advertisements in a newspaper. When that strategy doesn't work and you're coming up empty, you need to change the search method you've been using. Fourth, before you use any job hunting strategy, know the odds of that particular strategy. That way, if you know ahead of time that the odds are really bad, and subsequently you find out the method doesn't work for you, you won't take it so personally. According to U.S. studies at least, here are the 5 worst ways to look for the jobs that are out there. The first is mailing out or posting your resume. This search method has been found to have about a 93% failure rate. That is, out of every 100 job hunters who use this search method, 7 will find a job thereby, 93 job hunters out of 100 will not find the jobs that are out there if they use only this method to search for them. And by the way, I'm being generous here with my percentage. One study showed that outside the internet, only 1 out of 1,470 resumes actually resulted in a job. In other words, here, resumes had a 99.94% failure rate. Another study put the figure even higher. 1 job offer for every 1,700 resumes floating around out there. If all of these figures still seem like good odds to you, here's a way to put them into perspective. Would you take an airplane if you knew that only 1 out of 1,700 got through to its destination? We must always remind job hunters before you use any job hunting method, know the odds. That way, if you know ahead of time that the odds are really bad, as here with resumes, and subsequently you find out the method doesn't work for you, you won't take it so personally. The worst thing that can happen during your job hunt is to lose your self-esteem. The other 4 worst ways to look for those jobs that are out there are answering ads in professional or trade journals appropriate to your field, 92% failure rate. Searching on the internet, 90% failure rate. Answering local newspaper ads, 76 to 95% failure rate, depending on the level of salary being sought. And going to private employment agencies or search firms for help, 72 to 95% failure rate. Again, depending on the level of salary being sought. Now, what does research reveal as the 5 best ways to try to find a job? Well, listed in order from lowest success rate to best, they turn out to be asking for job leads from family members, friends, people in the community, staff at career centers, especially at the local community college or the high school or local college. You ask them one simple question. Do you know of any jobs at the place where you work or elsewhere? This search method has a 67% failure rate. This is one of the 5 best ways to look for a job, but it should be noted no method works all the time and for everybody. 67 job hunters out of 100 will still not find the jobs that are out there, even if they use this method to search for them. The other 4 best ways to look for a job are knocking on the door of any employer, factory, or office that interests you, whether or not they are known to have a vacancy. This is a 53% failure rate. By yourself, using your local phone book's yellow pages to identify subjects or fields of interest to you in the town or city where you now live, and then calling up the employers listed in that field to ask if they are hiring for the type of position you can do and do well. 31% failure rate. Again, this is one of the 5 best ways to look for a job, but it should be noted, as I have said, that no job hunting method is bulletproof. No method works all the time and for everybody. Next, in a group with other job hunters, using the phone book's yellow pages to identify subjects or fields of interest to you in the town or city where you are, and then calling up the employers listed in that field to ask if they are hiring for the type of position you can do and do well. This method has only a 16% failure rate. And finally, the very best way to look for a job is to do an inventory on yourself, know exactly what are the skills you have to offer, and then approaching organizations that interest you, whether or not they are known to have a vacancy, and asking to talk to the person who has the power to hire you for the position you are interested in. This method has an 86% success rate. That is, out of every 100 job hunters or career changes who use this search method, 86 will find a job or a new career thereby. It should be noted that this method's success rate is 12 times higher than the success rate for resumes. But it should also be noted that no job hunting method is bulletproof. No method works all the time and for everybody. 14 job hunters out of 100 will still not find the jobs that are out there, even if they use this method to search for them. Fifth key idea: it is best to approach small companies or small organizations with 20 or less employees in your job hunt. This is where, in any land, the most job opportunities are to be found. Sixth key idea: if you have a handicap or anything that might be regarded as a handicap, you must realize that there are two kinds of employers out there: those who will be bothered by your handicap and those who won't, as long as you can do the job. You politely thank the first kind of employer for their courtesy in seeing you. Ask them if they know anyone else who might be interested in your skills, and then politely take your leave. Keep going until you find the second kind of employer. And lastly, the important truth we must teach about the job hunt is that diligence and persistence are required. The job hunt often takes 18 weeks or longer, and migrating workers must devote to their job hunt at least 5 hours each day. Well, those are the 7 important ideas we must teach migrating workers in this global economy. Now, if we can get these ideas across, will it really make any difference to migrating workers from another country? Will they really be any more successful at their job hunt in their new country? Or will they still find the dice are loaded against them? All the research indicates that knowing more about the job hunt makes a huge difference to migrating workers. For example, here are 2 letters which I received from immigrants who had access to good career management learnings, in this case directly from a book, my book. The first letter is from a man who migrated from South Africa to New Zealand. He wrote, "I have just come through a job hunting escapade. New field, career, country, culture, the works. I resigned from the South African Navy and moved my family across the world to New Zealand. Being in the Navy all my working life, 18 years, I decided to move into the field of business management in New Zealand. I tried out all the normal avenues, the ads in newspapers. I applied to over 80 of these. Employers' ads on the internet. I applied to over 50 of these. And agencies. I signed up with 5 of these without an iota of success or your feedback. I then found your book and voila, I'm employed. I managed to find the exact job I wanted by following your book's advice in only 55 days since landing in New Zealand. I am smiling and purring like a Cheshire cat. The second letter is from a woman who migrated from China to the U.S. Before I read this book, she said, I was depressed and lost in the futile job hunt, using want ads only. I did not receive even one phone call from any ad I answered over a total of 4 months. I felt I was the most useless person on earth. I am female with a 2.5-year-old daughter, former professor in China, with no working experience at all in the U.S. We came here 7 months ago because my husband had a job offer here. Then on June 11th of last year, I saw your book in a local bookstore. Subsequently, I spent 3 weeks, 10 hours a day, except Sunday, reading every single word of your book and doing all the paper and pencil inventories about myself that are in the book. After getting to know myself much better, I felt I was ready to try the job hunt again. I used Parachute throughout as my guide from the very beginning to the very end, namely salary negotiation. In just 2 weeks, I secured, you guessed it, 2 job offers, one of which I am taking, as it is an excellent job with very good pay. It is, you guessed it again, a small company with 20 or so employees. It is also a career change. I was a professor of English, now I am to be a controller. So, what have we learned from these 2 letters and others? Migrations of workers will continue and increase. Many of those workers are destined to find their new land a cold land, so far as finding employment is concerned. But there's something each of us can do about that. We can put learning more about the job hunt at the top of our priority list. The global workplace needs more and more for us to be masters of the job hunt. Once we've done that, we need to create career management courses, privately funded job centers, and university classes where we can find ways to teach and share these learnings with others, particularly those caught up in the global migration of parts of the labor force. The need for us to do this can only increase, so we have a new thing we must all learn more about. And the time to begin our study and mastery of the job hunt is now. Thank you.